Hello, hello, friends, wherever you are dialing in from around the world. And I know we had an inordinate amount of people wanting to see the conversation which is about to be had. Now, we are in a large hinterland surrounded by the snow peaks of Utah. We're in a place called Provo. Not that far, it should be said, from Salt Lake City. But we really are in the middle of America in that sense, and I couldn't be happier to be here with the thrum, the pulse of Middle America, one way or to other, emerging as a sacred flame to ignite the hearts of humankind. We all know that Washington District of Columbia and its long-standing hegemony over reason and over peace and prosperity. I say hegemony, it's worked against the spirit and the flame of humanity, which it was ever intended to do and to be. Washington District of Columbia, that godless leviathan that is now being slain and laid to waste by the extraordinary disruption of Trump, Kennedy, Musk, Gabbard, and Patel, and others. It is a sacred moment, a sacred time, resultantly, because everything is going to be changing in this world. Everything is going to be changing in this world now. One way or the other, we're seeing in a matter of 10 weeks, we're seeing a century being dismantled. Be sure of that. And as that century, going back really to the onset of, you could loosely call it the Rockefeller or the Rothschild Compact, which was the Sabbatean priest banker class of both visible and invisible masters, taking humankind by the carotid artery and slashing that artery. We have bled civilizationally, culturally, at every level. We have bled. We have been poisoned systemically in the last century. It has been, by my reckoning, the mainstay of the last century could be described as systemic poisoning of the emergent angelic human. And there's a good reason why certain elements, both terrestrial, inner earthly, and extraterrestrially, there are reasons why, and these are epochal reasons, why humanity has been in the crosshairs of the cosmic and galactic assault, why earthly proxies of very dark lords and dark forces of contrast and of shade have sought to extinguish the flame of humankind. We represent the greater galactic planes. We represent this quadrant of the entire universe. The human being in the here and now is the immanent template of all that is good, all that is godly. We are the ones who will lead the ascension, so to speak. It's not a term I revere too much, but be sure that the revelation that is upon us now is leading to a complete upshift, a dimensional upshift in that sense. We all feel that. I know that everyone here feels that. It's why we've gathered. I am happiest, of course, today because I'm with a brother in arms, somebody who I've known for 2 decades and who I've loved for 2 decades. And it's not often that we get a chance to see one another. The last time was he was in Austin, Texas. And yes, that was the voice of God there. Yeah, off screen. That was the voice of God. It was last time was in Texas, I think the year before last, when I think we were meeting with BlackRock executives, amongst other people, as I recall. It's very interesting. interesting meetings were had at that time. Dr. David Martin is one of those weirdos. I don't know how else to put it. I've never regarded him as an earthling. No, he may, to his credit, he may have a modicum of terrestrial DNA, but I'll tell you what, there's a whole lot of his DNA which is from other climes. That's all I'm going to say, and I should know. We've known each other for 20 years. I couldn't be happier than to have this conversation with him today, because we're going to speak about things that we wanted to speak about for an awful long time. Dr. David Martin, I'm going to switch cameras. People can see your beautiful face. Good to see you.
There you go. Good to be here. And just to set the stage, because one of the things I think we have lost in the giant conversation around the capacity of humanity. I'm going to give you two metaphors, one from what is attributed to the teachings of Christ, where he described that his miracles were essentially humanity's low bar. He said, I've done these things. You will even do greater things. So I'd like us to at least hold for the next few hours the possibility that that was an instruction. How about that? Yeah. That maybe he was actually laying down the gauntlet to say, I'm showing you what can be done. Now, like, bring your A game. And I'm going to juxtapose that with the most improbable juxtaposition, because I don't think anybody in any record at any point in human history has put these two things together. In 1944, in the summer of 1944 at Bretton Woods, a very small group of people who were, to use the term that the media like to use now, unelected, unappointed, extra constitutional, got together in 1944, in the summer of 1944 at Bretton Woods, and just made shit up. They really did. They just made shit up. They just played around with this idea that, and by the way, this is during a period of the Second World War, when the outcome of the war was certainly not entirely in hand. The conversations were, if the Allies win, right? Not having won. This was if the Allies win, if the tide of the war goes the direction that people wanted to go. If all of those things happen, then, and then the then was, we would form little multilateral agencies like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, then called GATT. We would form things like the International Finance Corporation. We would form things like the World Bank. These were all no different, truly no different than a few people sitting in Provo, Utah on a Sunday afternoon going, why not?
Well, that would be then.
Right? This is the why not moment. And the reason I want to encourage you all to understand the juxtaposition of these two things is humanity has been under attack. And it's been under attack for a long time. But I would like to suggest that we have not necessarily done our level best to actually show up on the other side. There's been way too much acquiescence. There's somebody out there is going to take care of it. There's going to be a someone somewhere who's going to solve these issues. There's going to be a someone somewhere. And it's the white hat, it's the savior, it's this or it's that. Let me just encourage you in the next few hours. I'm imploring you in the next few hours. Put these two stories together. They're even greater things. Miracles that you've not yet seen. Those greater things are coming. But they only come when we step into the fullness of what it means to be human. The second thing is, unelected, unappointed are meaningless terms. Humanity choosing to show up in its full humanity is the single most powerful force we have on this earth. And if we emancipate our own sense of our own limitations, then we can declare into this moment a new earth, into this moment. We can declare it. And we don't need somebody's permission. We don't need somebody's endorsement. We don't need to overcome. No, we just do something simple like going, no, we're just gonna do this. And it turns out by engaging that which lives inside of each one of us. And I loved that Sacha started his presentation today with what I love when I teach. And by the way, I'm wearing this hat for a reason, that 12 senses program that I teach all over the world to reactivate everybody's 12-dimensional consciousness. But the 12th cranial nerve is the nerve of enunciation. It is the capacity to declare yourself, I am. It is quite literally that which we speak into existence. It is the cranial nerve. It is the intelligence. It's the wisdom of enunciation. It's the capacity to say, I am, not followed by an adjective, not followed by a noun, not followed by any other modifier. I am. And the minute we can step into that space, then we are becomes possible. And then we can. And all of the other things happen as a derivative. But we have to start with the what I am is. And that's why I'm so grateful that I didn't even know what you were starting with. But you start with the crescendo of my 12 senses course, which is to teach people to get back to their 12th, their final, the culminating cranial nerve, which is, we call it the hypoglossal nerve, but it is the nerve that is what gives us the ability to articulate the I am. So I am fully human Dave, hanging out with
his word against mine.
Yeah, exactly. With fully human Sacha, and I'll let you figure out how much of which one of us has what DNA.
Very good.
There
Very
you
good.
go.
Very good. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes. 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 Very good. Thank you, friends. I'm here trying to coordinate the studio at the same time as think coherently. So, David,
Yes.
in the 2 decades, nigh on 2 decades that we've known each other, we've been involved in a couple of intersects, which I believe have been very important. Very important. And I think that what we were doing in 2010, which is how many years ago? 15 years
That's
ago.
15 years ago already.
10 years ago, 15 years ago, in the United Nations, you were very gracious to take the kind of front role in articulating the initiative which we were trying to usher in at the multilateral level.
Yeah.
At that time. We were trying to usher in a breakpoint of the hegemony of the petrodollar and the oil and gas hegemony. We were trying to create to pierce the veil at that time in the heart of the biggest globalist apparatus, the United Nations. And we were given some leverage to do so by decent enough elements within the UN, who themselves knew that they didn't have the cojones to do it or the vision, but that it took outriders and outsiders like you and I to come in, shake up the game. And to their credit, they did want that to happen, many of them. And so we did. For a year, we conspired to put on a summit, a very important summit of world leaders, emphasis leaders in finance and energy, which we were going to do in Kuwait City. And we spent a year building up a summit called the EZ Summit, the Exemplar Zero Summit. What David and I did was put together a finance trust called Exemplar Zero Global Infrastructure Finance Trust, which was EZ Gift for short. It was a great name, great brand. And we delivered it to the heads of state and the governments of the Gulf nations, invited each of them to give us $1 billion each. We wanted $5 billion because we figured that with $5 billion 15 years ago, we would be able to seriously bring about a protection for breakthrough innovations, technologies, which David's been involved in for an awful long time, but to rush to market breakthrough remediation technologies, energy technologies, what have you, and allow the Gulf states to then get the glory, because they were the ones financing the transition from a petrodollar kind of combustion-based, false light, electrical value-based paradigm into a quantum solution of free energy technology. It was a brilliant idea and frankly could have worked, except it didn't. And 10 days before the summit, a SWAT team was sent in, arrested our team in Kuwait City, and I was thrown under the bus by the United Nations essentially and blamed for breaching protocol. I think I called one or two prime ministers motherfucker on the telephone. And then we did, in any event, in 10 days, we did manage to pull off the summit. Dave flew in. And he flew in, and we managed to put on our little summit anyway at the United Nations Millennium Plaza. And some good folks turned up, not least of which the then Mongolian president, who we were friendly with, sent his chief of staff to come and stand sentinel with us, which was a very decent thing to do. In any event, we did launch our initiative, we delivered our payload, and then we exited the United Nations because it was clear that it was far too weaponized and would have been actually very dangerous for us to continue at that time. But in any event, what I want to get to is, in your considered view now, 15 years later, what the kind of shenanigans which we were getting up to in the multilateral basement, we did everything in earnest on our own dime and with the best will in the world to change the status quo. Did we change the status quo?
Unquestionably. You know, it was funny. If you listen to Sacha in our earlier conversation today, you realize that as strange as this sounds, we are two men sitting on this stage. We do not have an entourage.
Speak for yourself. I've got an entourage. Put your hands up.
Okay, I don't have an entourage. We don't have an entourage. We don't have, you know, security details and weapons and everything else.
Have you seen behind that curtain, David?
We represent what the incumbency cannot ever even aspire to have. And this is very important. We brought into a place that is derelict of accountability and integrity and humanity. We brought a very simple truth. And the truth was that there is a right action to be done. There is a right way to do that right action. And we didn't need somebody else's authority to do it. We knew that it could be done. And ironically, what you'll find is that the illusion of the incumbent power structure has as its only currency fear. That's the only currency they have. And when you don't respond, I mean, listen, the number of times, and Sacha was not directly involved with this one, but it's important to realize in 2002 and 2003, and you can go back and look online and you can look at the Wall Street Journal articles and all the different mainstream media articles about me and my company back then. But when we were taking on, at the time, the second largest white collar crime in US history, the number of people who kept telling me I should watch my back and I should look out for this and I should look out for that. And I said at every one of those instances, two very important things. Number one, I'm going to do what is right. Period. That's it. Not elaborate. And by the way, not explaining it. It's right because it is, not because it's my opinion. It's right. I'm going to do what is right. And I'm going to speak the truth. Those are the two things that I'm going to use. And it turns out that I would go as far as to say that the outcome of the recent election is in part because of what we did.
I agree.
Where we sat back and said, normal, not beholden to financiers, not beholden to incumbent power systems. You know, Sacha and I sit on this stage as some of the probably only people I know who have not taken money to actually promote our causes or our initiatives or anything else. I am very fortunate to have a wife who, by the way, says hello from Australia.
Oh, God love her.
She's actually a bigger fan of Sacha than me sometimes. But I don't know what happened in Austin. All I know is I was told to give him an extra long hug. I don't know what it's about, but But I mean, I am very fortunate to have someone in my life who is willing to, say our life, our fortune, our resource is for humanity. And guess what? We'll go ahead and go to the mat, and we'll go with no one standing with us, with some people standing with us. Doesn't matter, because the right thing will be done. And here's the part that really terrifies the incumbency. The right thing is also provisioned. Did you hear what I just said? It's provisioned. Now, does that mean that we've always had an unlimited budget in the classic sense of the word to accomplish a mission? Absolutely not. In fact, I would go as far as to say that part of the reason why we've been effective is we haven't used the coin of the realm to achieve the truth. We've actually used something else, which is integrity, fellowship, brotherhood in our case. The things we've accomplished, you could not get a budget from an NGO or a multilateral agency to accomplish what we've done. But it's because we haven't had that we also can't be stopped.
Right.
And so there's this very interesting thing. We're the living proof. We truly are the living proof that the coin of the realm is part of the curse. So guess what? I'm not suggesting that you don't use it for the utilitarian value it has, because it does have a utilitarian value in the transition we're in. But I am deeply suggesting that the minute we decide that our capabilities to act are beholden to the coin of the realm, and we can't act unless we have it, shame on us. Shame on us. Because we are called to act. We are called to do what is right. We are called to do what is filled with integrity. And that is not a request, and that is not pursuant to funding. Act, do what is right, and that action will be provisioned. That simple.
Very good. Very good. I'm keen to know what your reflections are over the last couple of weeks. I mean, obviously, we're seeing a very coordinated, premeditated, and concerted effort at slaying a multifaceted Leviathan, something that is very dangerous. It's been cornered for a long time. But we are seeing literally every single day, not just a salvo, we're seeing blistering, seismic, full frontal takedown of these primary arms, legs of the deep state. It's happening in real time, isn't it? What do you say to those folks who are so steeped in cynicism and so jaded because of the abuses that we've all variously suffered, that feel that we're simply being led into a new dragnet of false light, and that this orchestration, emphasis with Elon Musk, the Iron Man, in a sense, it is a fucking comic strip, isn't it? In a way, it really is. We're looking at a Marvel comic right now. And as we do go through that Marvel comic, the storyline that's unfolding, how much of it do you sense is organic, real, and will deliver unto humankind? And how much do you believe is part of an orchestration, in a sense, to create a new controlled dominion of again, a false light? I said we're moving from the Satanic to the Luciferian. We just don't want to dwell in the Luciferian for too long.
And so I think one of the things we should think about is the universe is generous with energy. And energy, ironically, is devoid of judgment. Energy just is. What we ultimately do with it is where we have either positive or negative outcomes. But energy exists. And what I would say is that what we have is we have a beachhead where we now have access to conversations we couldn't have had 35 days ago. We literally couldn't have had it.
Correct.
Because we couldn't have live streamed this on certain platforms 35 days ago. So we are able to use an opening. But I would like to think of this as just a tear in the cloth. It is not the rendering of the veil. It is a tear in the cloth, to be sure. But there's a veil still yet to render, and we're not there. And I want to be very clear on the fact that we are not also going to be there with the, single swipe of the sword of a President Trump or an Elon Musk or anything else. This veil only tears when we, the people, tear it.
Very good.
Okay? So all of the, nearly messianic language that's being used right now, and I'll give you a perfect example of this. I just said on an interview, I think 2 days ago, I'm delighted that we got the $53 million from Wuhan Institute from USAID in the public domain. We should all be delighted that Elon Musk's activities with Doge got us that disclosure. But I want to be extremely clear in the following warning. That exact same file would have had over $500 million going to universities here in the United States, funding the bioweapons programs on 68 pathogens that are scheduled to be released on the United States. 68 other pathogens. And do you realize that all of the disclosure that we celebrated with, the press secretary getting up and saying, this is the DEI initiative here, and this is this initiative here. And this is where you get into that Luciferian piece, right? There's the false light piece of this, which is, yes, are we having partial disclosures? That's true. But my warning to everybody is, until we actually have the unveiling, the true unveiling of that which we're not yet prepared to face, right? There's a $500 million disclosure that didn't happen on that day. And I don't know how you feel mathematically about what I just said, but $53 million going to USAID Wuhan and a $500 million going to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill and its cronies around the bioweapons programs, and DARPA and its bioweapons programs through the P3 programs. I'm sorry, where did that disclosure happen? Oh, that's right, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And why might we ask the question, didn't it happen? And here comes the kicker of the answer, which nobody wants to face. The fact of the matter is, the academic institutions of the United States are the money laundering agencies through which the appointed and elected officials in this government, in this bureaucracy, really operate the deep state. Listen, I don't care where you are in this country right now. Your state universities have a 40+% overhead, which never gets audited, right, which never gets looked at. And then people mysteriously wonder why a senator or a congressman or a former vice president or a spouse of a former vice president or a retired judge who goes to a university and becomes provost or chancellor or this board member, that board member, mysteriously shows up, having been paid, what, $270,000 a year in salary? They mysteriously show up with $150 million of assets. Holy cow. Like, where are we roasting those cows? And the answer is, we're not. And why aren't we? We aren't because if we go back and we look at what was established at the turn of the last century, and by that I mean from 1904 to 1913, the university systems in the United States began a process of money laundering, which was solidified in 1980 with the Bayh-Dole Act. And the Bayh-Dole Act, which was celebrated time and time again as this breakthrough of American innovation and ingenuity, did what? It solidified congressional money laundering. It solidified the fact that as long as nobody asks the question, because God forbid, you would never want to ask, are universities doing the right thing? Because of course they are. How dare anybody suggest that they have any nefarious role at all, right? Because they're academic institutions of higher learning. We can't question those things. Well, newsflash, I'll celebrate the Trump-Musk, efforts the day they take down University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
Very good.
Yeah.
The day they take down University of Texas, Austin.
Very
The
good.
day they take down Oak Ridge National Labs in oh, that's right, Tennessee. I can't wait for that day, because when Battelle, SAIC, organizations like Booz Allen Hamilton When those organizations start showing up with the line items, and by the way, I'm speaking this into reality right now. I want you to hear what I'm saying. Go online today and watch what happened as a result of an interview I did 2 days ago. You know who lost several percent of market cap in the last couple days?
We saw it.
Oh, that's right. Booz Allen Hamilton and SAIC. And it feels like we can speak this into reality.
Yeah.
Let me speak.
Well, I have to say, just this morning, I don't know, Ali or Luna, which of you it was in my bed. That's a joke. I don't know which of you it was that said to me, "Oh my God, the stock markets. Have you seen the shift in the last?" That was it.
Yeah.
Right? Basically.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the good news is, listen, that's what I'm saying. People, that's one crazy dude on a podcast. Like, and yeah, I'm not going to reveal all of my DNA, but I mean, you know.
Very good. Very good. Say no.
I still put my pants on one leg at a time. I don't levitate into my pants.
Say no. Say no. So I wanted to also talk about, so, no, this is not the forum. Forgive me. Please. Bring it on later for sure. We did something else in 2021.
Yeah, we did.
Which needs to be on the record. We put Anthony Fauci on trial with Bobby Kennedy and Judy Mikovits and with Rocco Galati.
Yeah.
We did it in a 3-hour special broadcast, which was great fun, has to be said.
Yeah, it was.
And we pretty much, I'd say we called everything out at that time, which is now going to become. What does that say about the status quo, that it takes 4 years to catch up? And what does it say? You saw that entry on Wikipedia about desecrating Bobby Kennedy as being just a marginalized lawyer who, whatever, just a complete spit in the face. He's just walked into the highest office on the surface of the earth and is about to take down the agrochemical Satan and the pharmaceutical Satan. He's going to take down the biggest Leviathan that has polluted and killed and defiled and desecrated not just humanity, but this entire plane of existence for the last century. He's now the shit. He's the big cheese.
Yeah.
What happened in 4 years?
Well, so once again, I was concerned at his hearings. I was even more concerned with what happened in the Oval Office when we heard the celebration of AI-generated mRNA, which is going to be our customized healthcare programs, that was celebrated a few days into this administration. I was very disappointed to hear Bobby Kennedy talk about the fact that Operation Warp Speed was a great achievement. I don't like those. I don't like those statements, and I'm going to be unpopular for saying this, but I believe that integrity is an absolute.
David, let me speak to this, because that was a third piece I wanted to say.
Yeah.
The third thing that you and I have done together, first was the exemplarizer initiative of the United Nations. Secondly was focus on Fauci with Kennedy, Mikovits, Galati. And the third thing that we did, which I think is a signature thing, we did something just over a year ago, which I know because we're friendly with some of the Trump family, that we know that the man himself was watching. And we actually did it in order for him to be able to watch it. And what that special broadcast was me inviting you to lay out the chronology of events that had beset Trump in his first incumbency, when he was, by best accounts, profoundly compromised, when he had a matter of a few weeks to put 10,000 people into office, and whatever was going on, as he was coming, he was not getting any help from the status quo at that time in Washington. So he and his family were kind of, in a sense, circled the wagons, and were having to make all these thousands of executive appointments into the administration. And you went and did much of the forensic mapping to see how he was essentially routed, and then led the warp speed agenda. So the reason we put this out was to basically, in a sense, vicariously invite Donald Trump to be able to then come out and go, okay, I fucked up, but I was screwed. We were all screwed. That's what we were trying to do. Right? Absolutely. Has there been any uptake, do you think, on stepping back from the Operation Warp Speed? That's the point.
And so I think it's important to realize that these are seasons, and I understand. So my criticism, please take as just my standard. My standard is I'm going to call out truth when it needs to be called out, and it may be unpopular. I also want to be filled with grace in the same moment. I do know that there's an expediency that says that things have to happen in a season.
Yeah.
And so I'm willing to hold out the possibility that a season is upon us where these changes can unfold over a period of time. What I know is that there is, without question, the case of Alex Azar, the head of HHS, when the entire pandemic program was being rolled out. And remember, Alex Azar, at the time of his appointment in the Trump administration, was under investigation for antitrust, racketeering, and price fixing charges in price fixing the price of diabetic medicines in Mexico. Ultimately found guilty for that. Okay? So we have a convicted antitrust felon moving into HHS. I'm going to go out on not a very big limb and say, I don't think Trump intentionally appointed Alex Azar to HHS. I don't think he even knew who the heck Alex Azar was.
Right.
I don't think he knew that on September 19th, 2019, the day after the September 18th publication of The World at Risk by the World Health Organization, the day that the World Health Organization said we were going to have an accidental or deliberate release of a lethal respiratory pathogen, so that by September 2020, the world would accept the universal vaccine, which happened on September 18th, 2019. On September 19th, the executive order that President Trump signed could not have been drafted by President Trump. It's not possible. You cannot have a World Health Organization publication come out one day and 24 hours later have an executive order on the president's desk. That's not possible unless somebody set him up to fail. So that's why I'm giving him not just the benefit of the doubt, the certainty of a setup. There is no question that that was a setup. But here comes the kicker. We, having known this to be the case, also know that by September of 2018, so this is a year before, we knew that all the ingredients in the mRNA shots were going to be lethal. We knew that pseudouridine was going to trigger turbocancers. We knew it. It was published. That's why we knew it. We knew that remdesivir was so lethal that it killed 53% of the people in the Ebola trials that were the ZMapp trials in Africa. We knew that it was 53% lethal. There's no chance that that should have ever gone into a hospital protocol anywhere on earth, because even the World Health Organization had declared it to be unethical to use. Yet it became not only the protocol of choice, but are you ready for this? And I hate to say this, Rocky Mountain Health. Oh, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
The church-affiliated Rocky Mountain Health. Did I say that in Utah? Have I said it enough to piss people off? Rocky Mountain Health here in Utah knew that it had a lethal agent in its clinical protocol, and Rocky Mountain Health was paid by the United States government to inject patients with remdesivir to kill them. And that is your Rocky Mountain Health. The church's affiliated Rocky Mountain Health. That is it at Intermountain Health. Yeah, sorry about that. Intermountain Health. But here's the kicker, right? You have, at the exact same time, you have the LDS leadership saying that they're going to sign up for the shots, saying they're going to sign up for the protocols. You have all of these things happening. And what I'm telling you is that all of this information had to be known and knowable prior to any of what we called the pandemic. What does that mean? That means that the appropriate language we should be using for what we called the pandemic was it was actually a coup. It was a coup. And it was that absolutely dark set of forces that are hideous and that are bent since 1913 on the eugenics of humanity. Right? This goes back to the Carnegie Institute, when the Carnegie Institute in 1913 said that we needed to bring the discipline of cattle farmers to humans. Their words, not mine. Cattle farmers, where we do selective breeding as cattlemen would do. Does that sound like a pro-human, pro-life, pro-any? No, but those are the ones. Those are the very organizations that ultimately became Coldstream Harbor Lab, that ultimately became what we now know as the agency that invented DNA in 1953, which, by the way, doesn't exist. In every cell that you have in your body, you don't have any DNA. You have chromosomes. You have the ingredients, which we call nucleic acids, and those nucleic acids can, at times, fold themselves into helixes and all that stuff. But what you have in your cells are chromosomes. Those are antennae. They're wound conductive material. They're not stretched out little double helix strands. That's a model. That's a model. But it was a model to form a digital form of humanity in 1953. Not surprisingly, derived from, oh, that's right, the Third Reich's ferromagnetic tape, which happened to be a double helix.
Double helix, yeah, that's right.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Did you know that DNA, the model, was derived from Third Reich eugenics research? And that's what we've based what we call modern science on.
Yeah, and the mercurial caduceus.
And you just sit there going, holy cow, this thing has been in play for such a long time. And that's why I love the change of the age language we're using. Because the season of those dark forces had its run.
Indeed. So let's talk about you and I know everything there is to know more or less about the age-old Sabbatean agenda, about the kind of psycho-civilizational wheels of ritualistic blood sacrifice that kind of engendered a culture, which then birthed these kind of draconian elements and these draconian echelons, like the Bilderbergers and the Trilateral Commissions and the P2 lodges of this world and all the rest of it, the Fabianists as well, a key piece here, which Bill Gates, classic Vatican icon. Anthony Fauci, classic Vatican icon. Entirely appropriate that the two should, in a sense, be conjoined as the acme of evil empire, right? What is likely to happen now to Bill Gates and to Anthony Fauci? What is likely to happen, and what should happen? That's my question.
So beautiful, and the unholy trinity is having its first chink fall out of its armor right now. Pope Francis, who has been the orchestrator, is in fact
not very well.
Well, but
can't breathe. Oxygen.
Look
no
at,
oxygen.
Look at his face.
Right.
And you see the classic Spike inspired bioweapon effect.
Oh yeah.
He's got all of that happening, and now we know that he's actually falling apart, which is what we knew was going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Because remember, some of you probably don't remember. Remember Dolly the sheep? Back when we didn't want to play God. Do you remember? We were not going to play God. And isn't it fascinating that Pope Francis was installed for the purpose of emasculating what ultimately became the lampoon and what I would call the hostile takeover of the Catholic Church? It's actually kind of funny in a way that we had a Pope Benedict who was financially as corrupt as they've ever been. You have Francis come along, who is setting the world up for the collapse of the only resistance that the New World Order crowd had, because they actually saw the Dolly the Sheep lesson and they went, oh man, we got to neutralize that. So we put Francis in there to actually silence the voice of moral opposition to genetically modifying humans. And lo and behold, it worked. You hire the guy, you get him in the job, and it works. But here comes the kicker. Anthony Fauci, very few people know this, was a big fan of Pope Innocent III. Pope Innocent III, my favorite action figure to hate on the planet. 1215, notorious for what? Oh, that's right, for declaring the Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forest heresy, punishable by death. That Pope Innocent III, the same one who in 1215 also invented the clerical collar so that you could actually mask the change of color of your neck when you're telling a lie. On the same day, check it out, on the same day, he instituted the doctrine of infallibility. Just blow the tape down for a second. So on the exact same day, no kidding, they make up a doctrine of infallibility, which means you can't question anything the church says, and you do it under pain of death. So that's established. And on the same day, you build the clerical collar, which makes it impossible to tell whether somebody's lying to you because you cover up the glossopharyngeal nerve, which actually is what tells you whether somebody's telling you the truth. And they did it on the same day in 1215.
Genius.
I don't know how you guys think about this, but I think it was just a conspiracy. No, listen carefully. Watch what happens with Bill Gates. Watch what happens with Anthony Fauci, because now that we now have the ability to say that unequivocally, we know that the injection was pre-EUA. And I just spoke in code. I'm sorry. Prior to the emergency use authorization, we know the injection was being built. What does that mean? That means under the PrEP Act of 2005, it is not a medical countermeasure that's protected. Listen carefully. That's a bummer, isn't it? Because that means all the liability shields of the PrEP Act go away. And Biden's biggest mistake that he could have made, and I think this is an unforced error, I think it's one of those, we just take the wins when we can get them, and this is a win that we're going to get. The fact that Biden preemptively pardoned Fauci is the death knell to both Fauci and Gates.
Very good. Very good.
So I'm celebrating.
Very good. I have to say, well, I'm one of those humanists who thinks that it's a little unkind for us to take any kind of dig at Joseph Biden. I think that it's like kicking a very tired penguin that can't run. It's tragic. It's tragicomic. That the last 4 years must have been a kind of living hell. Don't you agree? For whatever sentient spark is left in that odious piece of shit masquerading as a human being.
Yeah.
Did I say my piece there? But
I like how you've been subtle in how you've kicked the penguin.
What is going to happen to a Joseph Biden? What is going to happen to a Hillary Clinton? And what is going to happen to, let's say, a Nancy Pelosi? Give us those three, because this is important, I think, to the American people and to the whole world at large. We need to know that you don't get away with that shit.
Yeah. And you know, the world is filled with tyrants that died peacefully in their graves.
Yes.
And so I've said many times, and I'm not popular for saying this, but I still think that we get the humanity we deserve. And the reason I say that is because I think that before we actually identify the speck in our brother's eye, we better look at the plank in our own eye. Here's the deal. Prior to COVID, if I were, I don't know, to go out on a limb and say, what was the biggest emergency use authorization active in 2018? How many of you even knew there was one active in 2018? Did you realize that active in 2018 was the emergency use authorization for vaccines for opioid addiction? Where's a single person in the medical freedom movement? A single person. And I'm calling all of us out, because I know I'm the only one on record anywhere who's actually pointed this out. Moderna got a patent for a vaccine for opioid addiction. Did you hear what I just said?
Yeah.
A vaccine for opioid addiction. And not one of you is talking about it. But here's the problem. We say we're woke. We say we got awakening. We say we're somehow the now informed. Bullshit. We're still barely out of the coma.
Exactly.
Our eyes are flittering, and we're somehow going, oh, no, I can drive. No, really, I can drive. No, you can't. Because if you don't know that Moderna is actually doing injections for opioid addiction, you haven't woken up. If you don't know that in Texas right now, women in the military are being subject to breast cancer prophylactic vaccination for breast cancer. You know what nobody's talking about? That. Listen, people, I'm not having a go at anybody. What I'm saying is, don't pat yourself on the back when we're not even in the first inning of the first game, right? We just figured out there's a ball and a bat. That's what we figured out.
Very, very good, very good, very good. So I'm curious to know, just on the side, are you that teenager with the flickering eyes who stole your dad's car and said, I can drive, I can drive? Was that you? Is there any part of you that is immoral, amoral?
So this is the best question to ask me now. Because if you would have asked me this question 2 months ago, I would have had a different answer.
Right. But the truth is...
But here you go. And this is actually, you're the second audience to hear it. And the first audience was my 12 Senses course a week and a half ago in Boulder. Many people know my wife, Kim. She is a luminous and amazing being. She is an exceptionally powerful energy, and she suffers very little BS in her life. And over the last 2 years, one of her criticisms of me has been that the man I was on stage was not the man that came home. Now, what that meant was that I was so absorbed in being right and being on my mission and being the voice of the integrity that the world needed, that I did not consider the effect that my life was having on a woman who I care about deeply. And it turns out that she asked for me to have an accountability that I wasn't prepared to have, because I was right. Go back in my life. One of the reasons why I'm so effective in political, geopolitical, economic, public, media, you name it, circles, is because I don't have any skeleton in my closet. None. There's not even a dog bone or a chicken bone. There's no bone.
I told you, ETs don't have skeletons.
They don't have skeletons. But here's the problem. The problem is I had turned into my own worst enemy. And I was actually not just an enemy of Kim's experience of me, but I was an enemy of all of your experience of me.
Very good.
Are you ready for this? I was so obsessed with my mission and the final score. Did I get Fauci in jail? Did I get this thing prosecuted? Did I get this project accomplished? Did I do that? That I had contempt for absolutely every single one of the little moments of grace that people afforded me. Do you realize what you've never seen? You've never seen me celebrate. Never once. You've not seen me celebrate. You know why? Because I heralded how above it all I was. I didn't need that kind of thing. I could go off and do everything on my own. You know why? Because I could. Here I am advocating for the best of humanity. And in truth, I had contempt for humanity. Because I recognized that if I had to do it alone, I'd do it alone. And this is a subtle thing, but it's important. It's super important. And I have to credit Kim and her stubbornness and her persistence and all of the pain that she let me experience, because she kept saying, you've got to work on yourself. You've got to work on yourself. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to, because I was perfectly fine doing that. I'll do it alone. until she helped me realize that that was the ultimate defilement of humanity. My inability to actually work with others. And by the way, I'm sitting on stage with a person for whom I have to request accommodation, mercy, and grace. Because Sacha has received some of that inhumanity from me. Sometimes when it was just more important for me to get what I had to say out than anybody else. And it turned out that over the last several months, I found out that there was some really massive asshole factor I had to get out of my life.
Wow, beautiful.
And I'm telling you what, the fact that you've sat with me for 20 years,
18-ish,
and the fact that we've been able to have the fellowship we've had is a testament to you. It truly is. Because there are ample moments when I did not treat you with the honor you deserved.
Well, thank you for that. I do not agree with that, but I thank you for that.
But here's the point. Listen, and this is the point. You didn't have to experience. If it was my truth and I knew it, the fact that I could cover for it doesn't excuse it. It will never excuse it.
Well, thank you. You speak for every man. Thank you. Turning to the audience, we have almost 1,000 people in this room, and we have many other rooms, so there's going to be many thousands of people watching this right now, and by tomorrow morning there will be hundreds of thousands of people. So, speaking just to the live audience, I will honor you, we will honor you by being able to ask one or two questions of Doc Martin and myself if you have something particular pointed. We've touched on a lot of stuff in the last hour and a half. We have another hour to go, and I also want to open the floor up to this beautiful clutch of souls here, friends. You can see them here. It's a lovely gathering. A little chilly in the air, which is not a bad thing, actually, keeping us on our toes. But yeah, friends, think about it. If there's anything pointed. Yes, I know David's amazing. You don't need to keep saying it, everyone. Yes, I know, hearts.
But
hearts,
I'm not
hearts.
really.
Look at thousands of comments.
Yeah,
there. Right.
And I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, friends, let me open the floor here. We'll maybe we might ignore you and just keep riffing. But any pointed questions that you have of either myself and or David, and
Well, before we do
riff.
that, can I do one more thing?
Please do.
I just wanted to touch on the New Earth project for a second. Could we do that?
Yes, please.
I think you need to see this in light of the fact that our collaboration saw a bunch of this stuff coming. The reason why you hear about the projects that Sacha's doing around the world, and the reason why you hear about the different energy, water, finance projects that I'm doing around the world, is because we saw this event horizon. Long before it was an event horizon that was in the public awareness. I value every one of you sitting here today because you now have, with this knowledge, both accountability and responsibility. You know that there are things that are being done. You know that there are projects that we're doing. And with that is not just an invitation, but it's really a conscription to say, you know, as humanity, we've got a chance to step into what's next. And we have a voice at the table, and much more than a voice at the table, we have the architecture in place to start saying there is a better form of humanity. There's a better way to engage. And I don't want to lose that point before people get into the Q&A piece. I think you need to understand that what has held us together is a common certainty that we knew that the system that was the incumbent system was failing. And rather than waiting for the chaos to ensue, we figured, wouldn't it be a great idea to build some things where as the old systems collapse, we can show, hey, you know what? There's systems that are working right now. There are places where people are treating each other with respect and dignity. There are places where you can have honest conversations and honest disagreements. There are places where you can exchange value in ways that aren't centrally denominated through Federal Reserve chaos. These are all things that are super important. I just want to make sure that you understand that what you heard in the beginning of this conversation today and everything that we're doing all is part and parcel of the same thing. As we wake up to the full extent of the corruption, we also wake up to the full possibility of now stepping into being the architects of something that's new. And I wanted to make sure we didn't lose that point.
Very good. And that caps it nicely, because I started with the enactment, embodiment, manifestation
exactly.
piece, and that is the key piece. So let's start with this. Ma'am, yes, I'm so sorry for cutting you short earlier, but you'll need to broadcast your voice, or I will repeat the question here for the audience.
The AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
Fauci's role in all of that. Do you know anything about
Yeah.
that?
Okay, so the question was about the AIDS crisis and Fauci's role in it, and whether Dave Martin knows anything about it.
So I'm going to step in the Tom Cowan dog poo lit on the front porch of your question. And I am saying that with both the respect and contempt that you can read into what I'm saying. I pointed out a few minutes ago that the model of DNA in 1953 was a model from which we then built models of the way viruses and the way DNA and RNA and all of these things work, and the way in which we believe protein is synthesized, and the way in which we believe all these things happen. But what we failed to do is understand that it was all based on a model. So let's get really clear on, was there a thing called HIV, human immunodeficiency virus? The answer is, it was as much a bioweapon as SARS-CoV-1, 2, H5N1, everything else. These are engineered and scheduled pathogens that are not pathogens occurring in nature. They are weapons created for the eugenics purposes that they were built for. So I'm very unpopular because the people who want to get into the terrain versus virus versus everything else are unwilling to have the academic or even the moral integrity of pointing out that both of them are equally failed models. Life is not biochemistry. Let me just say that one more time. Life is not biochemistry. The proof of that happens at the very inception of the first formation of life as it begins to gestate. Because it turns out that the myocardial cells that are required to begin the heartbeat, which is the very first thing that animates what we would call a living being, happen to need pulse to differentiate as undifferentiated myocardial stem cells. But here comes a problem. You can't have a pulse without the pacemaker, which means we are quite literally beaten into existence by a universal impulse, not by our own impulse. So anybody who tells me that this is a terrain versus virus model is full of shit. Therefore, all the derivatives of that model are equally full of shit.
Bravo.
Because we don't have HIV any more than we have the influenza virus, any more than we have any of the other things. What we do have is we have industrial chemical engineered weapons that have been introduced through industrial toxins, through aerosolized toxins, through foodborne toxins, through, are you ready for this? Emotional and energetic toxins.
Very good.
I know we're not supposed to say that, but it's true. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that what we have is a world where Anthony Fauci in 1984 came into NIH with a specific objective of getting the 1986 Act passed so that we could institutionalize liability shields for the bioweapons manufacturers that we misbranded then as now as vaccine manufacturers. And the minute we understand that the whole thing was a drug dealing racket for the purpose of killing human beings, the better off we'll be.
Very good. Thank you. Big truth. So are you good with that? You good with that answer? It's a pretty good one. All right. There's another thing here I just want to add onto this piece. I can't resist, because HIV/AIDS is a signature of our civilizational flaw.
Yeah.
It's a big signature. It was, in a sense, the first full spec attempt by this satanic status quo to begin a mass sacrifice of innocents, principally amongst the sub-Saharan black genome.
Yeah.
Be clear about that. H1N1 avian flu then was really points at the Asiatic genome, and so it goes on. And then, of course, COVID corona has its own unique and peculiar evil enterprise there, which was across the board. But going back to HIV/AIDS, I know because I was involved with Humanitat over 20 years ago with this, when we really did the hard forensic research, which some of the leading scientists and doctors, like Dr. Sam Chachawa at the time, whose Cedars-Sinai facility was closed down the day after he published his findings on a cure for HIV/AIDS. That was well over 20 years ago. Then he was beaten around the head and left for dead in his driveway, ended up in hiding in Mexico. And a horrendous story, which made the news headlines over 20 years ago. But the point being, I've been involved in that piece. And I was involved at the United Nations in trying to teach as many ambassadors and plenipotentiaries and permanent representatives that I could meet with about the truth of the HIV/AIDS that was almost 20 years ago. So it's a hell of a story, but I'll say this. The upshot of this broad-scale effort at the sub-Saharan African genome was an utter fail. At that time, it was so virulent in a sense that you could, as a black person, the blackest black, like Zimbabwe and Mozambique, Angola, if they even touched a railing, a siding in a bus station, through the sweat and the impedance in the skin, they could actually pick it. It was so virulent. It was so virulent. There was an exchange going on, and it captivated. And as you know, it almost worked, but it didn't. A phenomenon emerged, which is the upshot, which we now call the children of AIDS phenomenon. Rather like these indigo kids being born in recent generations who can play fucking Tchaikovsky at the age of 3 for some reason, and thousands of them. But there is a phenomenon that occurred connected to the morphogenetic upshift that occurred because of the existential threat against the sub-Saharan African genome. The human genome has a means by which it can sense a threat, an existential threat, and it changes coding. It moves. It uses the inertia and changes the whole game. Net result, you have a whole generation of Africans to this day, sub-Saharan black Africans in their 30s and 40s who cannot get ill. And their parents were the parents that both died of HIV/AIDS. What happened? What happened? Again, we have to start to think in these terms because that's how we start wise dreaming. And the wise dreaming is what changes the hologram. So we do have other extraordinary energetics in abeyance at work at the morphogenetic level, where we are not subjected to routine, mundane, systemic interventions. We need to dream ourselves out of these cycles. That's the piece I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So, any more questions in this room? Yes, sir.
So I appreciate your candor. You're one of the few people that I feel like talk about Stargate and kind of like that immediate introduction of mRNA. Part of the difference between what I thought previously with what's coming up now is free agency and the ability to choose whether or not you inject yourself with that. And with everything going on with luciferic and plant mRNA, combined with some things being sprayed from above, I'd love to have your comment in terms of what we can do collectively rather than being a reactive thing after the fact.
Yeah.
How do you prevent that?
Yeah. So I'm going to be really disappointing again. It was 1904 to 1910 that the Japanese figured out Bacillus thuringiensis toxin created leaky gut. And you heard the date, 1904 to 1910. Yet everybody sitting in this room didn't do anything as a society when every seed manufacturer decided to use BT to genetically modify every crop in America, leading to, oh, that's right, leaky gut syndrome across all of the population and autoimmune problems and allergen problems and everything else. So let's give ourselves permission to go, oh shit, we let that one happen, didn't we? We did. And we let COVID happen under the guise of anthrax in 2001, which gave us the PrEP Act in 2005. And the vast majority of people never had heard of the PrEP Act until COVID happened. So, with the background of we so far suck at intervention, what we can now do is we can start saying, let's take action today. So what can we do walking out of here today? Walking out of here today, we can actually say no more BT anything. Now, that sounds like an indirect answer, but it's not. We need to start strengthening the muscle. Every one of us does. We need to start strengthening the muscle that says, what action can I take today? Stargate's on the way, yes. But guess what I can do today? I can make sure that when I go to Whole Foods, I don't buy organic kale. And you heard me say this correctly, organic kale, which is allowed to be sprayed with, are you ready for this?
I am.
Bacillus thuringiensis toxin, because it's a natural thing, therefore still counts as organic. Did you hear what I just said? Like, what the hell? Here's the thing. The thing that we need to understand is we need to pick, and by the way, pick one thing now. I don't care what it is. Maybe it's your water. Maybe don't drink plastic-infused, fluoride-infected water. Maybe make a water commitment today. Maybe make a no BT food commitment tomorrow. Maybe make a no GMO commitment when you go to the grocery store. Take an extra 5 minutes of your life, look at ingredients, and go, that should not go in my body. Because here's the trick. Once we start exercising that muscle, then the industry that counts on our complacency of not giving a shit won't be able to work. Remember, we got into this mess by not giving a shit. We got into this mess because of complacency. So now what we have to do is stretch a muscle we haven't stretched for a long time, and there's no criticism. I'm just saying you can actually take a step when you walk out of here today. And that step is, if it's a plastic, single-use, disposable water bottle, do not buy it and do not use it. Use water, use metal. If it is a choice between a spring water versus an industrial supplied water, take the spring water. Take a look in your grocery pantry right now at your home. Seriously, take a look at it. If it has corn syrup in it, it has BT corn in it. Did you hear what I just said? If it has corn syrup in it, it has BT in it. These are simple steps. And all I'm saying is the best step we can take before we worry about what's coming is start informing your mind to act vigilantly now. Because then whatever is introduced, you won't fall for the bill of goods because it'll be sold the stupid way it is always sold. You're going to get this advantage for that exchange, right? And every one of those exchanges is a deal with the devil. Every one of them.
Very good. Well, I have to say, I mean, we know that Kennedy's already outlined what he's going to be doing.
Yeah.
So I think much of this is going to be laid to waste in the coming days at that policy level, which is a godsend to be sure.
Yeah, but we know that the agriculture injections
yes
are now, well in hand, and we know right now that 80+% of our beef stock in America has ear-injected growth hormone.
Wow.
Ear-injected growth hormone.
I can't imagine that he's not going to be addressing that next.
One would hope.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Yes, I know to some of the members of the audience out there, David did not answer my question. I know, and he will answer it now in short thrift,
Yes,
which is what should happen
versus
what is likely to happen to Bill Gates, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi. Give us those three examples.
Nothing happens with Hillary. Nothing happens with Hillary.
Because a deal is struck.
That deal is already struck. The only way anything happens with Gates is if the Janet Reno settlement agreement is unsealed. That's something President Trump could do with an executive order. And it should be done. Because what none of us sitting here know is what that deal actually was. He was a convicted felon, and then Janet Reno lets him off in exchange for the Gates Foundation doing its essentially stepping in and running the multilateral agencies. Somewhere in that deal is an exemption which gave Bill Gates the article, I think it is 13 protection, which says he cannot be criminally prosecuted. That's the UN Charter. I've showed you that. That sealed agreement with the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi should rip apart right now because it was illegal.
It's illegal, exactly.
It is absolutely illegal, and it needs to be examined, and that gets Bill Gates. Last but not least, Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci, in all likelihood, is going to be the guy that gets pegged with the crimes. And we have a bunch of different ways that we're working on it. I hesitate to celebrate that exclusively because, much like the Nuremberg trials did, where we decided to pick on what ultimately became less than 25 people, and we let the whole of the establishment of the German bureaucracy get away with literal murder.
I thought we gave them passports and brought them to Washington for the deep state.
I think that's what we did.
Oh, okay.
I think we gave them a bunch of different beach vacations in a bunch of places. Listen, thank you for correcting me. Intermountain Health, right, is full of financial, reckless homicide, and murder criminals. Okay? And until it's not a Fauci question, it is if you were at bedside and ordered remdesivir, you at least committed reckless endangerment of a patient, felony in the state of Utah, felony, and if they died, reckless homicide, at least, if not premeditated murder.
I was just following orders.
Yeah, exactly. And guess what? It's still homicide. This is the problem. The problem is, and we as a people need to understand, everybody calling for Nuremberg 2.0 needs to go back and read Nuremberg 1.0.
Right.
Nuremberg 1.0 did not achieve what we think it achieved. It actually calcified the moral consciousness of people who just did their job. And it became the justification for following orders. That is never acceptable in any situation ever. And in a new humanity, has no place.
Someone's just said here, who do I sue for my husband's death?
Okay, so the great news is, if we're serious about this, what we will do is we will form a class action that will go after the fact that we know Moderna was in a lawsuit with the lipid nanoparticle manufacturer on November of 2018. Anybody hear that date?
Yeah.
November of 2018. Feels a little bit before December 2019 on most calendars. I know you use different calendars. Not the Gregorian shit and all that stuff. We need a class action. And what we need to have is we need to have one attorney general, possibly in the state of Utah, possibly because in the state of Utah, we have the only state in the union that makes the illegal practice of medicine a prosecutable class 3 felony. And given the fact that this is the only state where that can be done, it'd be helpful if we had this conversation in Utah, wouldn't it?
Right. Very timely. Very timely. Okay. Christy, please, somebody here is trolling, banging on about John F. Kennedy's real. Please just stop it. You know, there's multiple people coming in. I don't know if it's a data, if it's a nano, if it's a bot, but it's beginning to piss me off. In any event, friends, thank you. Too many questions coming in. We've got some starred here. Do you believe in the terrain theory? We're not going there. Doc Martin already covered that a moment ago. Yes, ma'am. What's the question? It's a bit of a mundane question for David and I, to be blunt with you. Do you want to answer it?
I will simply say that if you go to the 2010 protocol that Ralph Barrick, who is the maker of the bomb, produced, what you find out is that any zinc ionophore, it doesn't matter what it is, any zinc ionophore, any zinc intermediary is actually helpful against infection of any of these weapons. They only published it in 2010 so that there was an evidence trail that allowed us to know that the bomb maker had the antidote for the bomb when he made the bomb. That's a pretty important thing. So anything that is a zinc ionophore is something that you ought to have standing by, because in an event of a bioweapon attack, the fact is a zinc ionophore is actually helpful in making sure the bioweapon doesn't get you.
Indeed. And, even Jim Humble, who I referenced earlier today, one of the inventors or founders of the discoverers of the chlorine dioxide molecule, just that sodium chloride and citric acid combined, activating chlorine dioxide, something which is kitchen chemistry. Kitchen chemistry often is the very thing that is going to redeem us from this satanic thrall. In any event, thank you for the question. Yes, ma'am.
This is for you, Sacha. The first one you were going through your slideshow, you talked about how we're going from this Satanistic to
Yes.
and it might get in the way.
Let me speak to that. Thank you. Thank you for giving me just a couple of minutes on that, because for me it's a very, very important piece. Bottom line for me is that I know so much about ritual satanic abuse, and I know so much about ritualistic magic as it relates to blood rites, and I know so much about what's been going on in the subterranean so-called deep state Miltel embasement, because the blood rights are directly connected to the military intelligence apparatus and operations and budgets and so on. So it's a very dark, very turgid, very messy compound or aggregate of evil empire that we don't actually see, but it's there. It's the underpinning, it's the counterpoint, it's the underpinning to how it makes manifest in this world. It's terrifying. It's a long, steady hand of evil and of witchery that goes back to Canaanite ritualism and encompasses the Sumerian, Egyptian, Roman. All of those civilizational wheels have variously trundled along in concert with that cornerstone harvest of humanity, sacrifice of innocence. That to me is the whole purpose, certainly, of my life's work and of my inquiry, was what is it? Because I grew up in the sub-Saharan war being shelled at for the first 15 years of my life, living behind grenade screens and wondering, where's mummy? Where's daddy? So I've got a good reason to lean into that question in life. And I have done. And I've become somewhat expert on what's going on in that psycho-civilization basement. What was the question again, so I can bring it to an end? So the Luciferian piece, thank you. The Satanic, and then the ITNJ, and the seedings we did on the hundreds and hundreds of testimonies we've taken from forensic experts, from police, detectives, from witnesses, from criminologists, from survivors. I know the distinction between the Satanic and the Luciferic. That's what I'm getting at here. And unfortunately, the hemispheres have been melded together, largely through the kind of misappropriation of real information and real gnosis by people like Aleister Crowley and back in the day possibly Blavatsky and others, who with the best will in the world played helter-skelter and melded ideas together into the gestalt, into the mind, the modern thinking mind. But I can tell you there is a stark distinction between the Satanic and the Luciferic. And people ask me, well, what's the primary distinction? I say, it's very simple. One does blood rituals and the other doesn't. So the Satanist and the era of Satanism and satanic intervention is all but over. That's the good news. The really good news. I could take this conversation further into when and where the imperial Draco reptilian elements were exfiltrated off the surface of this earth and which dateline, which day that ended. And I know about that stuff. And it's very, very real. And those are the conversations that the world is going to be having in the days ahead, connected to cosmogenesis and archaeocosmology, the truth of our origins. that we are the alien hybrid. We are the galactic hybrid. The human being is, by distinction, the universal genome. Get used to it, because it's owning that quanta, and the activation of that quanta comes to the being and the doing in the geometry of now. Once we do that, own fully the mantle, the Christed mantle, so to speak, we will remember who we are, and we will stand. And when we stand, we will look around and we will see that every single sentient intelligence in this cosmos is taking the knee to us. Because that is how majestic the human and the angelic human is. So the grand efforts over great swathes of time to subjugate, sublimate, desecrate, defile, holocaust, destroy, annihilate the angelic human has been the critical enterprise of so many external, extraneous forces and intelligences. But here we find ourselves on a brink of departing the great satanic age, the age of blood rites and blood ritualism. The Holocaust and this sacrifice of innocence is departing us. This is actually the year. And this is the month. We're going into March. March is the end of the Kali Yuga, the greatest measure of time that we have. My concern is that we are clearly, to my mind, now being invited or possibly inveigled into a journey into the luciferic, the false light matrix. That's where the whole transhumanist thing, that's also where David has a certain reticence when he's championing things that are happening in Washington and on the stage right now. He's always got a reticence there, and that's a very guarded and very intelligent position for any of us to have right now. Because the truth of the matter is, if we fall folly to this invitation of the Trump, Musk invitation into the cavalry has fully arrived, and it's all that could invite us into a whole new era of empirical dominion, pyramidal power structures, which will take us into smart cities and into transhumanism and into quantum computation and AI robotics that actually threaten all that is truly organic and sentient. And I don't say that that's the agenda of Trump, because I don't believe it for 1 second. I think he's a foundationally very good human. But there are other energetics that are still connected to the demiurge, still connected to the elemental cloud intelligences that we have not yet fully dissipated in the ethers. And until we have done it, we, through embodiment, enactment, and manifestation, we have brought into dissolution that element of the demiurge that still remains, the Ahriman. We are the ones that must bring that into full dissolution before the resurrection of the angelic human. So this passage that we're being invited to right now is likely to be a luciferic invitation, a false light matrix. Just be aware of it. To be aware of it, by my reckoning, is sufficient. David, comments?
Well, I think so. I love, one of the things I've loved about my relationship with Sacha is I love the way in which he brings archetypal narratives into a present reality. I think it's a very important part of a conversation. But I love the distinction about luciferic, because the fact is that that which is light, remember, is something that on this plane, and this is the second cranial nerve for those of you paying attention, we actually have a very poor understanding of light, because we've been suckered into this belief that our perception is a perception of light. But here's the problem. Every perception we have, which we call a light-based perception, is the reflected non-essence of a thing. The only reason I can see your faces is because you are rejecting, you're repelling that which you didn't absorb. So the only thing I truly see is that which you're not.
Very good.
Okay? Listen carefully. The only color grass isn't is green. That's the color it rejected. That's why we see green. But here comes the kicker. And this is where the distinction needs to get a little geeked out on the science level. Just like we don't see the reflected essence of a thing, we see the reflected non-essence of a thing. Greeks had a term eidos, one of their terms for what we now call knowledge. They had another one which was called gnosis. And the distinction Sacha just made is the distinction between eidos and gnosis. There's nothing inherently right or wrong about seeing reflected non-essence. That gives us geometry, it gives us shape, it gives us form, it gives us all the things that we can perceive. But the Greeks were smart enough to have the second word, gnosis, which was what? That was the considered knowing. That is the deep dive. That is the going into the essence of a thing. So that rather than seeing the reflected non-essence, you could look on stage and say, objectively, there's Sacha and me. And we love that photograph where I'm in my bow tie and he's in his suit, which is one of the only times I ever saw you in a suit. But here's the thing. You could actually look at us and you could say, well, from a reflected non-essence standpoint, they appear to be two different characters. But then if you actually get to know us, as we've gotten to know each other, you'd go, oh, hold on a minute. There's a deep similarity at the essence level, right? So the optics, which give us the appearance, the eidos, that's where that term comes from, is exactly this Luciferian distinction we need to realize. Nothing about light can be defiled. Listen carefully. Light cannot be defiled. It cannot. The reflection of light can be distorted. Got it? Light is an absolute. It's divine. It is eternal. Light cannot be defiled, but it can be distorted. And it can be distorted by reflectance. It can be distorted by absorbance. It can be distorted by other forms of manipulation and refraction and reflection. And my point is a simple one. That as we go into any of the phase we're in, allow yourself to develop the muscle again to say the reflex is getting my attention. Nothing wrong with that. But it's an invitation to a deeper exploration. It's an invitation to the deeper examination. Because light and knowledge, when put together, will not be defiled.
Bravo, beautiful. Ma'am.
Is that a genocide of innocence? Or is it a woman's choice?
I love to step on that hot potato because it's a live grenade and everybody loves live grenades when I step on them. Abortion is no different from philanthropy. It is the unconsidered cost of an unexamined life. If we actually understood that procreation across the whole of humanity was actually a sacred and auspicious ritual, where men and women would come together to incarnate on this plane life forms that actually were aligned for seasonality, for the mission that was in front of humanity, for all of the things that are the auspicious nature of life. And by the way, today across the world, there are communities that still practice exactly what I'm talking about. Sex for procreation and sex for recreation. And unfortunately, and the reason why I say it's no different from philanthropy is the unconsidered after-tax of our lack of sensitivity. If we had a system that we valued everything that was always there, we would have no need for philanthropy, and there would be no excess for philanthropy. So the great news is it would solve itself. Similarly, we wouldn't have a conversation about abortion if we actually had a conversation about auspicious procreation. If we did procreation the way humans are intended to do procreation, and I don't mean that in a moralistic sense, I literally mean it should be a sacred incarnation anytime life is invited onto this planet. We are shocked when we see transhumanism, we see all of these other deviations from norms, but we think we can just fuck at will. Well, newsflash, no. You know what? Everything in nature has seasons. Everything in nature is aligned to harmonics and is aligned to frequencies. And if we as humanity taught our humanity, we would not have the illusion of abortion because it wouldn't exist. So anybody who gets on the abortion level of the conversation, in my book, is actually once again debating the terrain versus virus theory. The issue is not that. The issue is, when are we going to respect, and this is where the emergent property Sasha's pointing to, that emergent angelic human, which actually has the decency of recognizing that there are times when men and women are appropriate to come together for the purpose of bringing life onto this planet. And there are times when the energy, maybe it's between the people, maybe it's the seasonality, maybe it's whatever it is, are inappropriate. And what we ought to be doing is we ought to be teaching sexuality and procreative sexuality in a way that reinstills the notion that it's a sacred invocation of inviting life onto this planet and is not an accident. We decided to abandon that in 1776, precisely. Why do I say that? I say that because in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, when he decided to say that humans were labor, you hear what I said?
Yeah.
Humans were labor. Guess what you don't give a shit about if humans are labor? You don't give a shit about the sanctity of the human life that you're bringing in, because they're just a cog in the machine. So all you're doing is drawing in raw materials for the inventory of the industrial supply chain. And guess what? Here we are, sitting since 1776, not having the conversation we should be having. Because the conversation we should be having is, how do we make sure that we train our daughters and our sons to grow up in a world where procreation is auspicious and it is an act of creation. That's the conversation we should be having, and that's the landmine I love to step on.
Very good.
Because I miss everybody. I think.
Ali, one moment, ma'am.
Yes, we talked about the currency of the new earth being more of an energetic and emotional exchange. Yet here we are on the verge of switching to perhaps a digital cryptocurrency. You speak about that.
I'll speak first on that, if I may, because that speaks also to the cornerstone of the New Earth Project, the New Earth Initiative that I began a very long time ago. And in the simplest possible terms, I know that I am absolutely right in what I'm about to say to you. There is no room for maneuver. There's no room for debate or dialogue or discussion beyond a certain point. I've already situated myself there. I call it 0-point economics. My take on it, and David's a lot more schooled than I am, and more educated than I am, but my take on it is absolute. The earlier, when I showed a slide of myself with some of the historical gold and one of the white hats, I was offered $1 billion of that gold, incidentally, in 2016. It was offered to me. They were prepared to put it on pallets and have it shipped to Bali. And that $1 billion in gold was offered to me to set up the New Earth Exchange, the New Earth economy that I was envisioning. And I turned it down. To my credit, I turned it down. It's caused subsequently many nights of cold sweats when I've reflected on having turned down $1 billion worth of gold and what one might have done with it. But I'll tell you, all that would have emerged from that gold would have been hubris and would have been contrast, would have been shade, one way or the other. And I knew that at the time when it was offered to me, with the best will in the world, by the white hat A1M1. So I'm glad I turned that down at that time. Fast forward to today, and I live without money myself. I have no money, none. I have less than $1,000 at any given time in a Revolut account, just so that I can put gas in the tank or get a cappuccino, the fifth one of the day. But that's it. I generate quite considerable sums of money. I need to say that as well, because this is not false modesty here. I don't care. I'm too old and tired for false modesty. But I do know what I envision, and I know that I must be the man on that noble path. I have to be that man. And so I don't deride anyone who has vast ambitions of wealth. I really don't. I don't make a judgment. I don't even deride it. I think it's great fun. And I think making insane amounts of prosperity or abundance in your hologram is absolutely your prerogative as a divine child of God. And if that's where you want to play, go play it. I just envision a world where there is absolutely no exchange in a totem between one soul and another. Right? And thank you for that. A 0 point economy must be predicated on fellowship and that alone. And that alone. So when I showed earlier also our grander plans for Africa and for building the economy of the new earth, which will be backed up by best accounts, trillions of dollars of real resources as we now tokenize and assetize real resources into another crypto bullshit exercise, which we will do because that's part of the transitionary phase. And I respect that sufficiently. And Adam and I are on phone with the leaders in the world in the crypto space, the big architects, the big scary ones, and they're all very excited by what we're talking about with where we take the new earth economy in the crypto space. But you know what? Anything that's crypto is bullshit. Anything that needs to hide is not in the light. So let's be clear about this. Let's only regard crypto anything as a stepping stone toward a 0 point economy. When I said we can build heaven on earth and have the 300 products from a toothbrush to a vertical take off and lift jet and everything in between manufactured out of locally farmed, resourced, processed, extruded, cast, and molded hemp products, bioresonant, 20 times the tensile strength of steel. Why is it that in 1937 the federal government banished hemp and turned it and demonized it? It's because prior to that date, every farmer in America had to farm 200 acres of hemp. And we were on a winning trajectory. Then the robber barons and the oil and gas barons came in, bought out Congress, flipped the whole goddamn deal, outlawed hemp, and all of a sudden, it was what Dave said earlier, the plastics and the nano. So the poison, systemic poisoning of humanity, the agrochem industry, pharma industries, all emerged off the back of the synthetic molecules. And that is, in my view, the source code of the devil. But we can get back to manufacturing every single product that we use. No matter how sophisticated or luxurious that product is, it can all be made out of hemp, except for a few small other components. And if we do that locally, we're going to be doing in Tennessee at our New Earth Tennessee project. We're planning right now with our industrial partners in Africa and 9 governments, we are planning the biggest hemp industrial park on the face of the earth that will literally produce every item that you can see in a Walmart will be made out of hemp, bioresonant. If you do that, we have just manifested the dream of my erstwhile fat spy best friend, Robert David Steele, who brought to the world the idea of true cost economics. God love him and God forgive him. But true cost economics matters if we're serious about stepping away from the old arcane tradition of priest bankers. Third party intervention. We don't need it. We don't want it. Thank you.
Well, and
that to me is the main thing.
Yeah, and so I published a paper several years ago for the Waterford Institute on what was called the true cost of the wealth of nations. And it was a spin-off of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. But I end that paper with a formula for wealth, which is actually something that I think is worth pointing out. And that is that wealth is actually the function of an extraction of utility where all of the future options are retained for all other users. So you have the utilitarian experience that you need, but nothing about your use of a thing has deprived another person of the use of that thing in either its own form or in a reformed way. And that paper is something that I encourage people to read because it actually did. In fact, Robert David Steele and I worked together significantly on this conversation about what was called all-in cost accounting. All-in cost accounting was the idea that scarcity and its unfortunate evil twin, which is secrecy, because remember, scarcity only exists in secrecy. We live in a universe that's abundant. So the only way we can get to scarcity is through secrecy. And the only way we can perpetuate the systems that we have in current monetary systems is through secrecy. So if you want to take both of those pillars of corruption out, then what you do is you actually have to fundamentally say that we have to flip the scarcity model on its head and then figure out how we deal with abundant utility programs. So if we think about, for example, hemp, and we think of something very simple, you don't understand this until I explain it. But if we built out of hemp, we would have no fire insurance anymore. Let me just say that again. If we built out of hemp, we would have no fire insurance.
Excellent.
Why? Because it turns out that compressed hemp doesn't ignite. Now imagine a world where you don't need Chicago fire and title anymore.
Right.
You don't need property and casualty insurance anymore. Why? Because you're not burning down houses. See, we don't think about the ripple effect, right? So an intervention in one dimension, and this is why we need to think about it differently. An intervention in one dimension has a ripple effect that says, ergo, these industries no longer are needed. Why? Because we're not building out of flammable pine. We're not building out of flammable pressboard or OSB. We're building out of something that is a natural fire retardant. And as a natural fire retardant, we don't have the problem. Think about the implications of what I just said. And this is one example of a myriad of examples. As we look at this way of reconstituting economies, that's why when we set up back in the New Earth University, New Earth Institute kinds of stuff, when we were in the early days, we talked about the need to re-examine not economics at the utilitarian level of currencies and banking and this kind of stuff. We actually said we had to go to the fundamental. We had to understand what value exchange actually was. And we had to build systems where the real value that you celebrate is proximity to the value, not how many intermediaries can I put in to put friction and inefficiency, which is how our current scarcity model works. How do I get rid of all inefficiencies and get the person who's going to use the thing next to the thing they're going to use with no middleman at all? Because it turns out if you do that, you eradicate what we currently call economies. We need to come back. Once again, I'm going to use a term that's important for us to reclaim. We need to come back to the Greek literal definition of economia, which was what? The stewardship of a household.
Bravo.
The stewardship of a household. You know what that wasn't? That wasn't a scorecard for egos. That was, can I make sure that when I need to set the table tonight, there's ample provisions for every mouth at that table? And the answer is, there is more than enough to go around when we step out of a model that was built on a scarcity and secrecy-based model. And it's a simple thing to do.
Very good. Next question, ma'am.
So you don't think that the new currencies and redemption, restitution, restoration is alive and coming, because that is the divine inheritance of every man, woman, and child on this earth?
I'm not certain of the question. Forgive me.
So they're talking about this cryptocurrency and these fake digital things that I do not believe at all, but I do believe there is a movement, because I've been 24/7 bringing the Bible and make it our reality, that the restoration, restitution, and redemption of all living beings on earth is impossible.
I'm glad you're asking this, so thank you, because you are now bringing the conversation to where we need to bring it. Yeah, so I understand now. Do you want to speak?
Yeah, but remember, where we are going as the humanity, we have to go naked. We can't bring the artifacts of the past. The problem with the restitution model is it living in an algebraic calculation of that there was an extortion or there was a suppression, and now we have to make restitution. And I'm going to be the first to tell you that that will carry then the toxins of the past into the future. Where we're going, what we have to do is understand that the entire archetypal framework in which we established scarcity, secrecy, and control, that whole system has to go away. And the way it goes away is not by reclaiming what it built. So everybody who tells me we're going to forgive debts and we're going to do this and that and the other thing, nonsense. because all that does is bring that energy into the new system. The new system has to be built on a fundamental understanding that we have an abundant universe that cannot be intermediated by anyone for any reason.
Very good.
And as such, we are not going to ever make up for the sins of the past. We are actually going to absolve. And that's why I love the fact that you talked about absolution. At the end, we actually absolve ourselves and everyone of the complicity of a system that never had its place on earth in the first place.
Very good. And the whole thing about atonement and absolution, as you've just brought it back home, it's about you and I in the immanent,
Yes.
the immanent present.
Exactly.
And the immanent speaks to the true revelation and the meaning of the word revelation, all that we aspire to, all that we seek toward and have ever sought toward on the path of life. Any path in any incarnation, in any world, all leads us somewhere. And it leads us on tremendous nebulous journeys and discoveries. But there is ultimately a return to immanence, every bit as important as the return to innocence. You wanted to ask a question, Ali?
Well, it's on topic before. I just wanted to shed light on the race, why it's being infertility rate, and how it's so insane.
So let's thank you for that, and point made. I want to bring this conversation back now to a close. We've 4 minutes away from 4 hours in my piece at the front end, including this conversation with David Martin. Many thousands of people looking in. Thank you to the audience there. I'm not going to be taking any more questions here, so you can withhold. I do want to bring this conversation back to redemption.
Yeah.
I want to bring it back to so the atonement piece. I think we all variously understand by now is the true. When we talk about restitution, we talk about resurrection, and we talk about restoration. All of these things speaks to the I am.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it ever speaks to. All it can ever speak to is the I am. So as we now culturally and arguably given the thrust and the dynamic of this American new American incumbency, this new energetic we're seeing in the last couple of weeks, which is cut and thrust like we haven't ever witnessed in the history of modern politicking. We're seeing the takedown of evil empire. And it's not just the deep state. It's not just Fauci. It's 500 years of blood sacrifice, Holocaust against the brown skin, red skin, yellow skin, black skin, and white skin people, because it's the white skinned people through dumb diversus that were arguably the most traumatized, the most butchered of all. So it's all of us. But the point being, this year, 2025, Anno Domini in the false light calendar, is an important one. Because this is really where we get to bring it all home. This is where we get to stand up. This is where we get to say, Khalas, baby, enough. I'm taking it from here. We're taking it from here. Me, the living man, the living woman of the living soil, our families, our communities. I don't seek permission from any quarter outside actualized self, nor will I ever speak about the importance of that.
So there is a term that I would love to reintroduce, which hasn't been spoken for way, way, way too long. And it is the term kinsman redeemer. This principle is one of the most beautiful principles that we need to reinstitute. What a kinsman redeemer was in societies across largely the Levant, but it's across Asia too, was when a person had committed a grievance, but they were incapable of satisfying the cost of that grievance. A kinsman, some member of their community, who had the capacity to bear either the punishment or the penalty or the cost of redemption, would step in. And it's a beautiful picture of humanity. It's actually a recognition that if we're going to be accountable for and to each other, there are times and seasons when more or less strength, resilience, capacity, any of those things exist in any of our lives. There are going to be days that you're feeling great. There are going to be days that you struggle. There are going to be moments when you have seasons of abundance. There's going to be moments of seasons of lack. But here's the kicker about the importance of this concept. We've made the mistake in religion of describing this as a redeemer, as in a third party who's doing the transacting on behalf of ourselves. And that's not what it was. It was the community accountability to say, if any of us fail, we have all failed. If any of us succeed, we've all succeeded. And it is incumbent on those of us who have the capacity and agency to bear the weight of a grievance, whatever that is. It is incumbent on us not only to shoulder that responsibility, but it's equally incumbent on the beneficiaries of that to ensure that that's never required. Because listen to how brilliant this concept was. If as a community we know that a grievance is going to ultimately befall somebody who's going to have to bear the weight of that grievance, and we know that it may fall on our shoulders today, or it may fall on somebody else's shoulders tomorrow, you know what we're all going to do? We're going to look out for each other a lot better. Because I don't want my failing to fall on you, and I don't want yours to fall on me. So what happens? By virtue of instituting the idea that none of us are going to let each other fall, we're not going to let each other fall. But if we have a stumble, whoever is in the proximity who has the capacity to redeem that moment steps in and redeems it. But no one rides a free lunch train. No one gets to do that again because the community comes along and says, we're not going to allow that to happen again. And do you see what happens? We build a beneficial cycle. And by virtue of saying that at any point in time, I may have to shoulder your burden, I'm going to make sure that I stay vigilant. And when I see a little thing start to slip away, I step in and do something when it's a little thing. Because I don't want it to become a big thing, which ultimately is going to fall on somebody's shoulders to clean up. And what I would love to have us encourage each other to do is, once again, easy thing to do walking out of the meeting today. How do we simultaneously look at those who are struggling around us and take a bit of their burden? Just do it. Maybe it's somebody who's just having a tough day, and maybe you can step in, and maybe it's a meal, maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's a thing. Step in and start intervening, start interacting, where you start holding the light burdens of each other. Because it turns out if we start holding the light burdens of each other, the burdens never get heavy. And as we bring in this picture of always being not just accountable for our own actions, but accountable for the actions of the communities in which we interact, we wind up manifesting the humanity that Sacha's been pointing to all day. This is not one where we ever put the burden of execution and responsibility on one messianic figure. Right? Sacha and I have worked together and in many instances have tried to blaze a trail that allow people to see the possibilities that are in front of us. But if anybody ever got complacent and said, well, Dave and Sacha are doing what needs to be done, we would have failed. Our job is to actually show, hey, there is a trail, but now let's move on that trail. Let's move together. Let's do that manifestation. Let's do the embodiment. Let's do those steps that bring us into a recognition that this is a together exercise. And that together exercise is accountability, responsibility, and above all, integrity. It has to come with absolute truth.
Friends, countrymen, earthlings, I give you Dr. David Martin. Friends, give it up for David. Okay. All right, friends, say goodbye to the audience. There's many thousands.
See you, everybody.
Dave, stay on. Christy, thank you. Audience, thank you, friends. Love
Thank you,
yous.
everybody.